Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Call of Duty Advanced Warfare Veteran Difficulty video walkthrough. This is Mission 9, it's called Crash. This is kind of crazy, this one. I think this is my favourite level on the game outside of Throttle, because Throttle's amazing. It's a lot of sequences where there's a ton of people to shoot, it's very easy to die, and it's not all that clear what they want you to do, because they generally want you to push up, but there seems to be a lot of enemies in your way when you're pushing up that doing that on Veteran is very dangerous. So it leads to some pretty interesting firefights, and I really recommend a target sight for this, because it's going to help you see things. And as much as I prefer the red dot in every conceivable way, the target finder is great. It's essentially just a K7 Avenger secondary function from a game that came out, what, 14 years ago? And if you got that, you're pretty cool. You get my respect anyway. But in accordance to the joke I mentioned in at the end of the last video, the funny thing about the dual wielding in Halo 2, it was actually pretty good. And then they removed it in every game after that when it made certain weapons really fun to use. Like, I think, did Halo 3 have it with the Mauler shotguns? I think it did. But aside from that, they kind of took it away, and I never knew why. You know, I never knew why they killed the pistol from the first game, because the pistol was amazing. It was like a two-shot kill, it was fucking awesome. But they did a lot of things. They stopped it from being able to do all those awesome things. Why? Why, Bungie? Why did you do these things? And then they make bloody Destiny, and it's the best game ever made, clearly. But the moral of the story I was talking about in the last video is I've played a lot of first-person shooters, and there are a lot of people just like me who have played their fair share of them. And I still think this is a genre with legs. I still think it's a genre with a lot of life in it. I just think we have to push forward instead of stepping backwards. And I'm not talking about Advanced Warfare in space. You don't have to put these games in space. You just have to do something different. You know, there's a great level on this game where you have injured your arm and you can only use one arm, so you can't reload, so instead you drop your gun and you pick up other guns and you can't aim down sights. And what happens when you aim is this massive homage to old school aiming. And if anybody played games where this was, you know, the primary way to kill, you'll remember it. And instead of aiming down sights, what happens is your reticle gets a little smaller and the game zooms a little bit. And that was how you aimed. That's how you used to have to aim. A great modern game that has that aiming is Fear. If you've ever played FEAR, which is like First Encounter Assault Reconnaissance or something stupid, some acronym that's just retarded. But Fear had that kind of shooting, and almost every game before it had that kind of shooting. And then the Iron Sight innovation came through. Like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye, they had hipfire primarily and auto-aim. And the only way to shoot on that game was pretty much auto-aim, because you didn't have an analog to do it. You had 4 directional buttons to aim with. And it was really tough, unless, you know, you played a lot. So what they gave you is they gave you a manual aim function. And the manual aim was hold the R button, which was the right bumper. And if you've ever held the N64 pad, it's not a hard button to use. But you had your trigger on your left hand, because unless you held the pad like a savage, like some motherfuckers did. And when you held it, it completely froze your character, and the analog that moved your aimer. And your aimer had probably the highest sensitivity of anything I've ever played. And I play games on as high as it gets, just so I can acclimatise and have, hopefully, you know, quicker gun skill and things. It was horrible. Like, you would literally... Your aimer would be shaking like a shitting dog because you couldn't hold the damn analog steady enough, because it was first generation analog at this point. You know, outside of the arcade, of course, where the joysticks reigned supreme. And it was really tough to aim. So, back in the day when you got used to it and you got good at it, you were a baller for doing it, and it was really tough. And then we go forward, and life changed in first-person shooters. You know, we went from picking up med packs, or picking up armor pieces, or health pieces, and the little numbers and what have you, to regenerating health. We went from barely having any zoom and an aim to looking down a sights, to having it, you know, this more realistic approach on you can see your hands. Anyone remember Timesplitters? An amazing game for its time. I was watching DSP the other day, say how Halo invented Infected. And I don't know who invented Infected, but it sure as shit wasn't Halo, because I was doing that shit in TimeSplitters before Halo ever did it. And I'm sure there's probably another game that did it before that, but TimeSplitters, if you don't know, was the people who made GoldenEye, the people who made Rare great, even though there were a lot of people in Rare that were still great until they got bought out by Microsoft and they essentially fucking lobotomized them. But the people who made GoldenEye there was a large conglomerate of them who worked at, I can't remember the name of the dev for TimeSplitters, which is an insult to them because they're amazing. And they went on to make TimeSplitters, which was a PS2 exclusive. It was a system seller back in the day, because it was this, from the makers of GoldenEye, this futuristic first-person shooter. And it had a lot of those features that GoldenEye had, where when you had run out of your clip, instead of a reload animation, your gun would go under the screen and come back up reloaded. And it'd make that cliche Hollywood sound file noise, that guns don't make. But we made them make that noise because of films. And it was super fast. It was almost... it wasn't quite Unreal Tournament, but it was really twitchy like those games. It had that cartoony visuals to it, that stylized aesthetic, and it was fast and it was awesome and it was silly. It was goofy, man. There was monkey modes and breaking glass with bricks modes and all sorts of mad stuff, and it was legitimately hard too. That is a game I never beat on hard, and I think it went harder than hard because you didn't get any life back and there were no checkpoints on the levels, so you got dead. You were at the beginning of the game. If I'd have been making YouTube videos then, I would have no hair, because that shit is hard. I probably wouldn't even do hardest difficulty back then, because I couldn't. I'd be the dude on easy, like, this is an easy mode walkthrough, because shit was hard. But TimeSplitters was amazing. And then TimeSplitters 2, such a great game, so good, so many innovations. Just a love letter to fans of first-person shooters. But we moved on from that. We got regenerating life. We got cover systems, adaptive cover systems, where your character, when you're close to something that's chest high, which is essentially 90% of every battlefield ever designed by any god or designer, you would crouch, and then when you aimed, you would bob out. We had slow motion added into it. We had leaning and tilting and stuff like that. We had melee executions and context-sensitive executions added. We had all these innovations. We had the whole blurry screen bullshit and bloody screen and super bright screen for some reason, and then super dark screen and everything in between, black and white, bleeding to sepia and monochrome. All these interesting things, these design choices that have come out of the last, 20 years of first-person shooters. And now we're waiting patiently for the next thing, the next step, the next branch of the olive tree and the awesomeness that comes with it, and nobody's making it. And I don't see it, because if it's Destiny, it can go suck a fucking dick. Because Destiny, even if you love it, you have to admit it's got so many shortcomings. There is more things wrong with Destiny than there are right. Because all the stuff that's right is essentially what they took from Halo and put in it. Because let's be fair here, guys. Destiny is a great game in areas of it, but in other areas, it baffles the mind how anybody spent money on it. Because it literally looks like it's ripped directly from an older franchise with all the creativity that was in that older franchise gutted out. Just completely flayed. And it's really strange. But I for one, am patiently waiting to see where they go with it, because I know there's life to it. And they've done novelties like Mirror's Edge, where it was parkour based, and then they ruined that by adding too much combat towards the end of it, and a very poor signposting for the levels, whereas your first playthrough was one of the most frustrating things in gaming history. But once you knew the levels and you knew the lines, if you liked, you could get really good, you could get super awesome paths, and it became this really fun experience. But that first experience is enough to put many players off. And they literally turned the game off, because there were times when the game signposted where to go by making objects red, and sometimes it didn't make the objects red, or the ones that it made red weren't immediately obvious. So there were moments where you kind of made your own path, and the trial and error was through the roof. And if you're the type of person who looks as trial as error as a bad thing, you just wouldn't play. But there was melee-focused first-person shooters like your Condemned. You know, Condemned had so many interesting differences to it that made it such a great game, and I'm still waiting for a sequel, even though Condemned 2 kind of went batshit crazy at the end and all political and supernatural. Still a great game. But we've done so much in this genre, and we're just waiting for another evolution. I don't think we're going to get it anytime soon, but I always hope for it. Like Starbreeze. Starbreeze are one of my favourite devs for first-person shooters, because they commit to the perspective, and they try to do interesting things. And there's another studio now, isn't there? Is it Machine Games, which is former Starbreeze guys that made Wolfenstein, or Wolfenstein? And that was a fantastic game. It had problems, but there was so much to love in it and so much charm that I'm very excited to see what that studio does next. And I do believe if innovations are going to happen, it's probably going to be from a dev like that. And, you know, say what you want about Duke Nukem Forever, and it's a pretty terrible game. But it had an innovation in first-person shooters that I'd never seen before, believe it or not. And I suppose you could compare it to one of the skulls in Halo, which I think is the Black Eye Skull. But as far as a mechanic goes in like a single-player experience that was built into the system, I'd never seen it before, and that was executing enemies gave you life. And it might have already been something that's been utilised before, but I'm just ignorant of those uses. But when I saw it in that game, I immediately thought, you know, that's pretty interesting. I bet a really talented dev could do something cool with that and make it worthwhile. Because as it stands, it's kind of a broken concept, as interesting as it is. Because if anybody's played Halo games on Mythic, I think it's called, where you have all the skulls on, Black Eye fucking sucks. It absolutely blows. Having to punch somebody to heal yourself is horrendous. It kills all the fun. Because in these games, when you play them on Legendary, or any game that you play on a harder difficulty, the closer you are to the enemy, the closer you are to death. That's how it always works. At distance you have some safety, you have time to react. Up close you don't. And that's why I always found the premise of it inherently contradictory, but still interesting and still an innovation regardless of which, you know, game it first appeared in. I mean, look at taking cover in third-person shooters. Everybody gives it to Gears like they invented it. When there was a game called, I think was it Kill Switch, that did it years before. It didn't do it as polished or as visceral or as awesome, but it still did a mighty good job and innovated that notion into the player's mind. The third-person perspective like that. Resident Evil 4, baby. That did not exist before that game. So even if you hate Resident Evils, it did fantastic things. And we're waiting now to see where this genre goes, because if it doesn't, this is all we're going to get. This and fucking Destiny. And to some people that's enough, but it's not to me. So thank you very much for watching, and you take care now.